Check.
All set. Yeah, thanks, Sean. And I should be on too, so.
Good evening. Welcome back to People's University, America 250. Next week at this program, on July 16th, Year of the French, Robert Kelly is coming to town. He's an expert on Marquis de Lafayette, Admiral de Grasse, etc. He'll be telling you all about their Franco-American alliance and their legacy in the Revolutionary War. On Monday at 6 p.m., Kelly Lear will be here, a certified genealogist. Her program is called Digging Up Your Roots. And then on Tuesday at noon, we have the Singing Sisters of St. Joseph with Chuck Julian. That should be a popular one. On your table, you'll find the brochures for this series. Also, a flyer that allows you, if you scan the barcode, to read all the text that's up in our exhibit and see the images without having to stand there for a couple of hours if you don't want to do that. You're welcome to do that, but if we're open, stuff like that. Let me introduce our guests for tonight. Michael Giorgiani. This is a good Irish name. No, he told me his Irish name is O'Leary, which is my wife's maiden name. And so all of us are half Italian and half Irish in this room. Michael Giorgiani has taught middle school social studies in the Hempfield area school district for over 25 years. He's also published articles on the website Emerging Civil War. Mike earned his bachelor's degree in secondary education, social studies from Clarion University of Pennsylvania and his master's in education from University of Pittsburgh in 2002. He's going to tell us all about 1777. Here's Michael Giorgiani.
Thank you, Sean, for that kind introduction. I do appreciate it. I'm honored to be here in Wheeling here tonight, and I have not had a chance to spend enough time here and just got a small taste of that here this evening. So, but I also want to, commend Sean, Julia, everyone in the staff here that puts together Lunch with Books, People's University. This is an incredible program, and I am not aware of anything back home near where I live, near Greensburg and Latrobe, that even is remotely like this. So you should be very, very proud of this. So yes. As Sean said, I'm a middle school social studies teacher, but I'm a forever student and I have a passion for history. One of the things I like to do with the students to get them warmed up in the right frame of mind is actually look at the date or the kind of general time frame that we're at and say, what happened on this day, in history. And in the summer months, it's been crazy with a lot of things. And being in West Virginia, I think that June 20th, we're looking at kind of a very important date for the state of West Virginia. I was able to go to Independence Hall today and was absolutely blown away and impressed by everything that was in there. An absolutely fantastic place. But being admitted as the 35th state on June 20th, West Virginia, certainly has a very, very different way of joining the Union than many other places did. Also, I want to talk about, kind of closer, let's do yesterday. Because yesterday is the anniversary of Colonel Nixon first person to read the Declaration of Independence out loud in Independence Square in Philadelphia. And yes, it had already been printed, and yes, there were already copies out there, but the thousands of people that were there that day, that was something that was very, very memorable, to them, is hearing it out loud. I know we have some Civil War fans out there too, so I got to talk about a few things related to the Civil War. Battle of Monocacy near Frederick, Maryland. If any of my relatives are watching from Frederick, Mount Airy area, right off I-70 in Frederick, you have the Monocacy battlefield. Also, the end of the siege of Port Hudson, which I know the Battle of Vicksburg had already ended, but you have the surrender at Port Hudson and the Union gaining control of the Mississippi River. 271 years ago today, and I have not seen Young Washington yet, so don't spoil it for me, any of you that have been to the movies yet. And, I've read some of the things on the internet and things that, it's not accurate and so on. And I want to go into it looking like this is not a documentary. This is not something that you're supposed to use as sure research. This is something that's going to be entertainment, value. If it gets anyone out there interested in researching George Washington's rise in the 20s and the difficulties that he went through, I think that's fantastic. So I want to go into it in that. But today is the anniversary of Braddock's defeat, the Battle of the Monongahela, which has anyone in here ever been to Kennywood before, outside of Pittsburgh? Okay, when you look across from Kittyland over the Monongahela River, now you see the Edgar Thomson Steel Mill located there. The battlefield was very, very close by there, where of all the terrible things that happened to Washington in the French and Indian War, Jumonville Glen, Fort Necessity, even though Braddock's defeat is not considered a positive good, it is something that I think for Washington, he comes out of that looking like somebody that's officer material, that actually is someone who's a positive. It's really too bad about the weather here too today, because being a teacher, we're thinking of making things relevant, we're thinking of hands-on, we're thinking on real-world stuff, and I thought we could all go to Wheeling Hill and basically reenact McCulloch's Leap. I'm kidding. We're not going to. Yeah. Your faces as I said that were like, he's kidding, right? But no, we're not going to go to reenact. I am going to talk about, Wheeling with McCulloch's Leap here, because we're going to focus on 1777. And I don't know how many music fans are out there too. John Eric and I talk about music sometimes also. But today, July 9th, the last performance of the Grateful Dead with Jerry Garcia. He passed away on August 9th, 1995, but, 31 years ago today, he passed away. About 2 weeks before that, I was able to see the Grateful Dead in person at Three River Stadium in Pittsburgh. I've made a lot of bad musical decisions. That was not one. That was definitely a good one. So, okay. Before we get into the events of 1777, we need to pick up where Phil Greenwald had left off last week with the horrible situation facing the American cause in 1776 as it came to a close. It's hard to imagine a worse military situation than what was happening as we get through the summer months and then into December 1776. Skin of our teeth, we're hanging by a thread. We've got some serious issues that we're trying to deal with. The story of 1777 is of salvaging, it's of resuscitating, it's reinvigorating, and it's redirecting this independence movement that appeared to be in a very, very bad predicament come Christmas 1776. So let's talk military situation, political situation, international standing in about 2 minutes here before I get into the 10 crucial days here. We know that New York had been lost. Battles like Long Island, White Plains, Fort Washington, none of them are going our way. Washington's going to be chased out of New York City, chased across New Jersey in the fall of 1776, and basically heading towards Pennsylvania. Maybe even a worse problem than losing those battles is actually the size of his army, which was approximately 20 to 24,000, is going to drop to about 6,000 effective soldiers. So we're not talking just battles. We're not talking killed, wounded, captured, missing, the typical casualties. We're talking the Ds, as I call them, disease and desertion. Things are looking extremely bad at this point. Thomas Paine, who is famous for basically framing the argument for American independence with common sense, which most people I think have heard of in here, but he's going to follow that up with a pamphlet called The American Crisis that he will put out in December 1776. These are the times that try men's soul. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will shrink in this crisis. That's what makes it so important. Washington will have that American crisis read to his soldiers in December of 1776. That's how bad things actually were. The political situation, we're talking about what historians refer to as an irreversible commitment. We don't want to go back to being a colony. We don't want to go back to, being part of England anymore. There's no more olive branches to be put out there. We want autonomy. We want independence. The fire that starts in Massachusetts that spreads throughout the 13 colonies, these are your most passionate people. You can't go back on that. We're all in, as they say, with the independence movement. And that's despite the military losses that are going on. I know Phil had mentioned last week, too, the Continental Congress. As Washington's fleeing across New Jersey, they're going to have to leave Philadelphia and move to Baltimore. Depending what account you look at, the capital will be moved up to 7 or 8 times during the Revolutionary War. So the loss of Philadelphia, the loss of your capital, at least in our case, was not something that was going to be, the war's over, we're finished. International standing. We've got an ace up our sleeve, I think, with our international standing. The French, Louis XVI and the French are not all in yet. But we have Ben Franklin, who's actually in, Paris in December, trying to leverage as much commitment to the American cause as he possibly can. And I can't imagine a more difficult job than what Ben Franklin had. He's got no wins and nothing really to go on here. So what's our focus? What I want to take a look at. Let's take 10-15 minutes on the 10 crucial days, which end with the Battle of Princeton on January 3rd, 1777. They're all kind of tied together, and Washington doesn't get enough credit for something. It's military related, but it's not battlefield directly related, that I think really helps with not just Princeton, but also the Second Battle of Trenton on January 2nd. The Battle of Saratoga, which I don't know if a lot of people are aware of this, is actually fought at 2 different dates, 18 days apart from each other, September 19th and October 7th, 1777. Valley Forge, following the fall of Philadelphia again. And by the way, whenever the Congress was forced to flee to Baltimore in December of 1776, they come back in March of 1777, and guess what? 6 months later, they have to flee again, this time to Lancaster, Pennsylvania for 1 day. 1 day, Lancaster, Pennsylvania was the capital. And then further east to York, Pennsylvania, where they will stay a little bit longer. And we are going to get into the action here in the upper Ohio Valley with the first siege of Fort Henry, McCulloch's Leap. I probably don't need to tell the story to anybody in here, but I do want to mention how that's related to frontier forts, expansion west, and why that benefits everyone. Oh, well, why is Fort Henry there? Why is Fort Van Meter there? They're not just there for the local population. I think they're there for what's coming after this war actually will come to an end. And that is to have permanent settlement, to have strategic locations like, Wheeling actually be under the control of, colonists. Any one of these topics you could take 1 hour on. So I'm going to try to do a cursory look at all of these. Some of these are happening concurrently with each other, like the beginning of the Philadelphia campaign and the Battle of Saratoga also. Okay, so let's get into the Battle of Princeton, but first a couple things, because I don't know if everyone was here last week or was able to watch on the Lunch with Books live stream on there. After Washington crosses the Delaware, surprisingly on Christmas night, 1776, he will embark on basically a 10-day campaign that will change the course of the war. You're not going to win the war by January 3rd, but you can redirect it like I was saying earlier. And that's what I think Washington is attempting to do. I don't know psychologically where Washington was at after all of those losses, after fleeing across New Jersey, after the Congress obviously has to flee to Baltimore. But this is something that he has to show his beaten up army still has some fight in it. We're beaten down, but our spirit is not broke. We still have some fight to go, and this is going to be how they do that. Now, is his army at its lowest point? Yes, we had already said they had dropped from over 20,000 down to about 5,000 to 6,000. After January 3rd, American morale does start to increase. Now, is that a combination of things like, the American crisis? Is that the wins? Yes, I think it is. But, when you look at what's happening around the colonies, in a place like Pennsylvania or in Virginia, I'm sure where we're at was part of Virginia, people within families are divided. Loyalists and patriots are living in the same household. Just like politics divides us today, it was probably much worse because now you're putting the uniform on for the other side. This would have been a very difficult time. Now, one of the things Washington learns, and after the Christmas crossing, Washington will cross back into Pennsylvania and cross back into New Jersey between December 26th and New Year's Eve. I don't know when Washington learns this fact, but basically many of his enlisted men, their service is about to expire on December 31st. They're going to expire. Not that they're deserting. Hey, I put my time in, I'm done. I'm going home. What he needs to do is appeal to these men to stay on. And the appeal he makes is this, and I don't have his speech or anything. Give me 6 more weeks and you will make $10. Now, I know you're looking at me like, who in the world would agree to that? I don't know how much they got paid or how often they got paid, but it worked. He's able to make the appeal, give me 6 more weeks for $10. And these people stay on. Okay, now that happens before December 31st. They're back across the Delaware River in New Jersey. Washington's army is there. They get wind, and there's already all kind of spy network stuff going on in the Revolutionary War. They get wind that basically there is going to be, the British Army is coming down from Princeton towards Trenton. There's a bridge that crosses, Assunpink Creek that basically would be a good place to make a stand. This is one of those times in history where at a bridge, the size of your army becomes a liability because now they have to cross that area. So here comes 8,000 basically British soldiers, and they've got to cross to get to Trenton at Assunpink Creek. The Continental Army is able to hold them back basically at that bridge. But it's decision time because, okay, that worked once because they didn't realize what they were walking into. So we've got a decision to make. Washington has a decision. Do we stay here and attempt to fight them off again, thinking that Cornwallis might do the same thing? Or do we redeploy back across the river into Pennsylvania? Or do we try something else? And that's where Arthur St. Clair, where I come from in Westmoreland County, and any of those guys watching back, at home now are probably so happy I'm talking about Arthur St. Clair. He says, we've got some intelligence. We've got some spies that we know the exact location of the British at Princeton. We know when their movements are. We know when their patrols are coming out. And basically, I think we could find this road that's not the post road that goes between Princeton and Trenton, but it's a back road that they don't patrol. And we could sneak on that road and intercept, because those other 1,000, that rear guard, they're coming. So we've got word of them coming. But you have one night. You decide right now. You're in or you're out. You're doing this or you're not. Washington will listen to Arthur St. Clair, and he says, well, what's your plan? They're not just going to watch us all leave, and think this is going to work. Arthur St. Clair has the plan. Let's have 500 Americans stay back. Keep the campfires lit. Act like you're digging entrenchments. And actually, I think the ground was frozen at this point, so I know Phil had mentioned this last week. Wrap those wagon wheels in straw or something so they don't make as much noise, but they won't sink in. We can actually get them out of here and onto that road. It works. So St. Clair's banking everything on this, and really Washington was too. This will get Arthur St. Clair promoted to Major General. And it's probably his greatest moment, because I'm going to talk in a few minutes about one of his low moments too. Now, the Battle of Princeton itself is actually going to occur, in a place where neither of the armies were really ready. So here on this part of the map, if you could see it from the back, this is that back road that they're coming on. Here's the post road between Trenton and Princeton here. At some point in the morning, and Washington was behind schedule, they spot each other, and the British can't tell how many Americans are there, because there's a wooded area nearby. Arthur St. Clair's brigade, he's a brigade commander at that point, but he will get promoted. He's up here in the front where Washington's at. So there's snow on the ground. Everyone's thinking about winter quarters. Nobody expects this to actually happen. Initially, the British commander, Charles Malwood, is coming down, and he will attack Hugh Mercer. And I've got to take a minute to talk about Hugh Mercer also. This was a friend of Washington's from the French and Indian War. Both of these guys are colonels in the Virginia militia in the French and Indian War. Between the French and Indian War and the Revolution, Hugh Mercer lived near George Washington. He was almost like a doctor. I believe he had purchased some land off Washington. He had treated members of Washington's family, his mother mainly being one of those people. And they have a very close relationship. It starts terribly for the Americans, because Mercer's force is going to be overrun here, and the militia under Cadwalder that comes in behind them sees all of Mercer's guys retreating back, and Mercer himself was actually bayoneted. And that's this painting right here, the "Surrender, you damn rebel." They thought they had George Washington. The British actually thought they had got Washington. Mercer will not surrender. He's bayoneted multiple times. He will die 9 days later. He actually refused to leave the field. And when he finally is pulled off the field, his wounds were too bad. Like I said, he wouldn't survive for 2 more weeks. What makes this incredible is this. Washington will come down to the scene. And Cadwalder, another American brigade commander, his 1,000 troops that come up in support of Mercer panic. These are militiamen. They're not moving forward. And Washington personally will lead that charge. And that's where the statue I had on my opening screen is in Washington Circle in Washington, D.C. Washington will take his hat off. He will advance to within 30 yards, to the point where his horse would not go any further, and say, "Parade with us, my brave fellows. There is but a few of the enemy, and we can take them directly." And he's able to push the British back. Once they start pushing the British back, it's a fine fox chase, my boys. A famous quote from Washington there. When those volleys start coming back and forth, staff officers with Washington cover their face. They expect to see him get hit. And when the smoke clears after that volley, it's one of the greatest moments ever because he made it through. He made it through. So absolutely Washington, he gets some of that French and Indian War type of, feeling in him again, and he's not leading from the back. He is leading from the front. The battle will move towards the town of Princeton and toward what was then known as the College of New Jersey. This is Nassau Hall. Now in Princeton, it's called Princeton University, obviously, today, but Nassau Hall still stands there today. The British, in their retreat, start hiding in buildings and around things. Approximately 200 British soldiers are going to be in Nassau Hall. And any Hamilton fans out there tonight? Alexander Hamilton, I'm not going to make you sing, don't worry. You're like, I'm not raising my hand. This guy's going to want me to sing History's Got Its Eyes on You, or, not throwing away my shot. So I'm not going to sing. Sorry, you're all looking at me like you want me to. I'm not going to do it. But anyway, Alexander Hamilton, and I don't know if this story is 100% true, but I'm going to tell it anyway. He's an artillery commander, brings up part of his battery. He's got 3 cannons, and they're telling him British soldiers are in that building. But that's an academic building, sir. I'm not sure we should fire on it. No, we got to fire a few shots at that, because that's going to make them surrender. Supposedly, the British were already going to surrender anyway, and Hamilton fires a few shots, one of them going through one of the windows, destroying a painting of King George that they would later replace with a painting of Washington. But supposedly the story is he was denied acceptance when he had applied to go to school at the College of New Jersey. So nobody's quite sure the timeline. When were you told that they were going to surrender? Sir, it might not have been necessary for you to fire at the academic building the way you did. He's like, I didn't know they were going to surrender until they were waving the flag out the window. So I don't know if that's totally true. British casualties. At the Battle of Princeton, 100 killed, 70 wounded, 280 captured. Thanks to Hamilton, I think, and what he did at Nassau Hall. The American side, 30 killed, 40 wounded. The British military will make light of the 10 crucial days. They'll act like, oh yeah, that wasn't that big of a deal. Look at what we did for the 6 months before it. But I've got a few quotes here I just want to share with you. The historian Ira Gruber would state that Trenton and Princeton destroyed the illusion of British invincibility, made patriots of potential loyalists, and spoiled British hopes to end the war. Another historian, Sir George Otto Trevelyan, it may be doubted that so small a number of men ever employed so short a space of time with greater and more lasting effects upon the history of the world. These are British historians saying this. These are not Americans. It did redirect things. It did show that we still had some life, and it did show that you're going to have to do a lot more to us to beat us in this war. This is not just your little colonial uprising that you're used to doing. Okay, so what happens in between January 3rd and the beginning of the Philadelphia campaign and the beginning of the Saratoga campaign, which will come later into the summer? The first thing, from January through about April, you have something called the Forage War in New Jersey. The British Army would make their winter quarters at 3 places: New York City, New Brunswick, and a place called Perth Amboy. The Americans will be at Morristown. And the winter quarters, you still need food. You still need supplies. Your animals still need forage. So what's going to be happening is this guerrilla hit-and-run type of fighting that's not a massive battle or anything, but throughout northern New Jersey is going to be constant guerrilla warfare for a lot of time. Where I come from in western Pennsylvania, many of the soldiers in McKay's battalion or the 8th Pennsylvania Regiment would say, I was sent there and took part in these skirmishes. They didn't quite know what to call it, but there's not really a lot of names for it, but I actually took part in these. One of the bigger ones is a place called Bound Brook that's on April 12th. And a lot of this was hit and run, fake out, act like there's stuff there, and then trap the British. And, they're playing a lot of games with each other. June 14th, 1777, Congress adopts the Stars and Stripes as the flag. So why do we have Flag Day on June 14th? That's where it comes from. The beginning of the Saratoga campaign involving Burgoyne, and we'll talk for a minute just about how that was supposed to work. But Burgoyne is coming south from Canada through Lake Champlain, Lake George, towards Albany, New York, about 65 miles north of New York City. Fort Ticonderoga is in the way. And on July 5th, the British capture Fort Ticonderoga without a fight. Arthur St. Clair and Philip Schuyler, they will have their worst day ever by basically withdrawing without a fight there. To many members of the Congress, Fort Ticonderoga, when I said that, probably a lot of you are thinking, wait, that's Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys that captured Fort Ticonderoga in 1775. You can't give that up without a fight. What are you doing? In reality, I think St. Clair had maybe 3,000 to 4,000 with an 8,000 British bearing down on them. Now, I will say this. There was probably a mistake made by Arthur St. Clair by not taking the heights around Fort Ticonderoga. I want to say it's Mount Defiance, that they didn't think the British could get any cannons up there anyway. The British got cannons up there. Now they're completely surrounded. And like I said, they're going to both be court-martialed. They will request to have their trial. Both of them will be exonerated, but Arthur St. Clair will never lead again. September 11th, since I'm not going to spend a ton of time with the Philadelphia campaign, the British victory at Brandywine, which you could take an entire hour or more talking about the Philadelphia campaign, that will directly lead to the fall of Philadelphia. Excuse me. Okay, Battle of Saratoga. We've got to talk about this because this is truly a turning point. So the maps, this one right here in the middle kind of shows Lake Champlain. That red line would be the path that Burgoyne is taking. Here's Fort Ticonderoga here, and then obviously Saratoga to the south. Now, it's probably impossible to feel bad for any British officer when we're talking about the Revolutionary War, but this guy right here, John Burgoyne, Gentleman Johnny Burgoyne, as when the pension records, that's what some of the American militiamen called him. He gets left out to dry. And the plan that they have for Saratoga, first battle was on September 19th. Second battle is going to be, 18 days later on October 7th. It's a tremendous turning point, not just because it's a morale-lifting win. We need wins. And there wasn't a lot of that going on. It furthers the hope for independence. And next week, when Robert Kelly does come, as Sean was talking about, he's talking about the French. The French need to see wins. They need to see. We're not fully committing to this until we can see that you can actually beat the British. Saratoga is going to be basically that moment. Because when you look back at the 10 crucial days, we snuck across the river on Christmas and surprised you. We stopped you at Second Trenton at Assunpink Creek because you got stuck at the bridge. Then we took a back road, and we were able to, sneak up on your rear guard that was coming up. But everything seems to be trickery and smoke and mirrors. Saratoga's not like that. Now here's the British plan really, really quick. Check my time here. We're doing good. And if you have questions too at the end, we'll save some time for questions also. The British plan is basically to cut off the New England colonies from the rest of the 13 colonies. They're going to attempt to have Burgoyne's force, about 8,000 soldiers when it started, coming down from Montreal, from Quebec, towards Albany, New York here. St. Leger is coming from Fort Oswego on Lake Ontario from the west to the east in the Mohawk River Valley in central New York. He's supposed to meet up with Burgoyne, and you're supposed to have General Howe coming from New York City with his army coming up from New York to here. I don't know where this plan was made, but nobody, well, I will say this. Burgoyne does what he was supposed to do. St. Leger attempts to do what he was supposed to do, and Howe completely does his own thing and goes after Philadelphia. So it's a plan, but it didn't really work. I say that St. Leger tried because if you look at this map, right here, Oriskany, there's a battle in the Mohawk Valley. I don't know if anyone's heard of the Battle of Oriskany before. Almost everybody involved was a Native American on both sides or American born. Very few British soldiers there, and there's not many battles you can actually point to that. Oriskany is one. This is the Native Americans call this the place of sadness, where there are Native Americans on both sides. They are no longer united and will literally be fighting against each other in a war for American independence. But St. Leger gets stopped there, ends up retreating back towards Canada eventually. Howe leaves and actually sails all the way down to the Chesapeake Bay and actually comes up to take Philadelphia from the south. And I don't know, this red line represents Howe's path through the summer of 1777. I don't know, Burgoyne definitely knew St. Leger had been defeated at Oriskany on August 6th. I don't know when he knew that Howe was not coming to reinforce him. Burgoyne will take a very bad loss too at the Battle of Bennington, right on the New York-Vermont border. Burgoyne had sent part of his men out to gather supplies because they're running low on supplies too, and they are defeated basically at the Battle of Bennington, which will hurt them very, very bad. At the same time, what are the Americans doing? The exact opposite. Washington is going to send reinforcements to this area. Maybe he did this after the fall of, Fort Ticonderoga. Maybe he realized the importance of central New York and not getting cut off the New England colonies. But he will actually, Philip Schuyler is obviously going to be replaced when he's court-martialed, but Horatio Gates is going to actually replace Schuyler. This is Gates here on the left. And you're going to have a ton of reinforcements sent from Washington's own army, defending Philadelphia, including General Benedict Arnold. Yes, that Benedict Arnold. But before, he actually turns against the American cause. This might have something to do with it, and let me tell you the story. Part of the force that goes with Benedict Arnold is 500 sharpshooters, Morgan's riflemen, many of which are from southwestern Pennsylvania, some from Virginia, and so on. And those guys are going to do some serious work at both of the battles of Saratoga. Washington takes a gamble here. Is it worth it sending this many people away? Philadelphia will fall. Would Saratoga have turned out this way? It looks like everything's rosy for the Americans, right? It looks like, the British aren't getting the help, and here comes all these Americans coming to help. They're in the middle of central New York and can't get any supplies. It's not quite as good of a picture as you would think. These two guys, Horatio Gates, very defensive-minded. You build entrenchments, you build works, let them come to you. Benedict Arnold's one of the best and aggressive tactical field commanders that Washington has. They do not see eye to eye militarily. Now, Gates is in charge. General Gates is in charge. When Benedict Arnold gets there, they're cordial with each other. They're yes sir, no sir, everything's fine like that. But personally, I do not think these guys liked each other either. I don't like how you tuck your shirt in. I don't like how you eat your cereal. It's more than just a military disagreement between them. But they're working well together, at least at first. But I'd say a mutual resentment would probably be a safe way to describe their relationship. Gates decides that we need to do is build up our defenses in this high ground area at Bemis Heights. And he builds up the defenses there at Bemis Heights, thinking the British have to come through this area where the Mohawk River and the Hudson River come together. Pretty good plan. Arnold, though, actually had anticipated, let me make sure I'm on my, too far. Arnold had anticipated in September that the British are probably not just going to walk right into our strongest point. They're going to look for a place that's a potential vulnerability or a weak spot, and the American left flank, that these blue lines over here where it says September 19th and October 7th, the area where Freeman's Farm is located, where today is, protected battlefield, that is where you have the first fight actually take place. It's a British victory, but it goes back and forth. Morgan's riflemen actually go crazy in this because the first hour of the battle, the Americans don't use any artillery at all, none. But they've got Morgan's riflemen. They're picking off officers. They're picking off British artillery, so much so that they're picking off so many British artillerymen that Americans are able to take the British position, British take the artillery, but they just go back and forth throughout the day. The British will have the last hand, and at 3 o'clock or so, when they have their last attack, they're able to overwhelm us. The battle ends really with darkness, and that's going to be the same thing on October 7th too. Burgoyne's forces, the British win the field after about 4.5 hours, but they pay a high price, and they're in a really bad spot. The problem for the Americans comes right here, is basically in the after-action report that Horatio Gates gives to Congress, he doesn't even mention Benedict Arnold at all. And Arnold comes back to Gates and says, "Sir, I'd like to talk to you about the after-action report that you just issued to Congress." "Oh yeah, I said it was great. We held the British back, basically." He's like, "Yeah, but sir, you didn't mention anything that I did." Arnold says, "I was out there directing those guys, and the only reason those Americans were on the left flank pushed out is because of me. I'm not getting any credit for this." Now, all the soldiers pretty much were directed by Arnold, and there's conflicting reports that say, yes, you were actually there, or no, you were sitting in your tent just telling people what to do. Either way, all the officers said, yes, I was under Arnold's command. He was directing things. This argument turns so bad, Horatio Gates will relieve Benedict Arnold of his command and tell him, "You're staying in your tent. You're not doing anything else in this war. I'm notifying Washington." He says, "You know what? Then why don't you just transfer me back right now?" So Gates will actually say to Benedict Arnold, "Yeah, here's your transfer paper. You can leave." Supposedly a staff officer that knew Arnold really was a great commander never pushed that through. Because Arnold, he does stay in his tent for a while, but he never actually does leave. So we don't exactly have the best situation going on right now. The British, though, are literally trapped in upstate New York, and they have no support coming to them. They thought there might be some help coming from the south, from New York, but I think they pretty much understood it's basically us. We're living off half rations. We're in a very difficult spot. The American army now is swelled to the size of about 13,000 with more and more militiamen coming through. There's another story that a lot of people aren't aware of, I think. The murder of a woman named Jane McCrae. And she was actually the fiance of a loyalist that was serving under Burgoyne's command. She is killed by Native Americans that were working with Burgoyne. Well, this word gets out, and that just enrages people to join the other side. So the American side's, growing. The British are stuck. Late September turns to October. The British realize there's no help coming. And October 7th, you will have the second battle, basically almost in the same spot, at Saratoga. Burgoyne sends a force forward. I think they're pretty desperate at this time, and they're going to be pushed back. The British will lose 600 men at the first battle. They're going to lose 400 men at the second battle in only about 2 hours. Burgoyne himself, it's a little bit like Washington at, not Fort Necessity, but the Battle of Monongahela. He's got bullet holes through his jacket. He's got bullet holes in his hat. That happens to Burgoyne. They thought they actually had him, but they didn't. In the battle, after about 1 hour, Benedict Arnold cannot stay in his tent. He can't take it that the men are out there fighting and he's there. So Benedict Arnold comes rushing out of his tent, and actually tries to lead the Americans and does start to push the British back toward their original entrenchments. When he does this, Gates finds out and sends a staff officer, I want that man arrested and returned to his tent immediately. By the time the staff officer catches up with Benedict Arnold, Arnold has been wounded. He's been shot in the leg, and his horse actually had fallen on him. And he's wounded. So they come up to him. He's like being stretchered out, and they say, oh, boy, you're under arrest. You're going back to your tent. When really he was on the way to the hospital by the time, that our field hospital, when that had happened. So the Americans are able to win at Saratoga basically by the British not getting the help they needed, the American army swelling forward, swelling to a larger size, and the British just cannot deal with this. October 17th, the British will surrender, and they're never exchanged. I think that, the initial, the surrender papers, Gates actually said, yes, your army can return to Great Britain. Congress won't agree to that. Those men from Burgoyne's army end up staying in Charlottesville, Virginia, till the end of the war. They're never exchanged. Burgoyne himself will go back to England in 1778. And I had a person come up to me at another speech, and they said that, hey, wasn't Burgoyne, since normally for officers, they said, we'll give you a general for your general, and so, we didn't have anybody at the level of Burgoyne, anyone. So supposedly 1,000 American prisoners of war, and I can't give you the exact, were exchanged for Burgoyne. That we agreed to that, 1,000. Now, I don't know if that's totally true, but Burgoyne does get back to England. Horatio Gates will try to actually, and this is a very short campaign, gain command as commander-in-chief of the army. He never does, to replace George Washington, but he does try that for a little bit. A British officer, to quote them after Saratoga, will say, the courage and obstinacy with which the Americans fought were the astonishment of everyone, and now we became fully convinced that they are not the contemptible enemy we had hitherto imagined them, incapable of standing a regular engagement, and that they would only fight behind strong and powerful works. We're showing the world, we're showing the British, we're showing ourselves that we can win this war. Saratoga is incredible for that. Now, you're thinking about Benedict Arnold up there, I can see. Arnold, during this time, will actually, we believe, in the 5 months he's actually recovering from that leg wound, start to actually correspond with the British. And that's where, by 1780, Arnold's completely, defected to the British side. He does marry a woman named Peggy Shippen in 1779 that was a loyalist too. So I'm sure that may have had something to do with this. But I felt like, when I look at, the betrayal that he felt from Gates, from not getting the respect that he thought from Saratoga, he never really recovers from that, including almost getting killed, in the process. But what do we take from Saratoga? The French will enter the war on our side. The Treaty of Alliance that we so desperately need. Money, soldiers, Rochambeau, Lafayette, the French Navy, 12,000 French soldiers, artillery. Could we have won this war without the French's support? You'll see people that will argue both ways. That's something I think for next week. I'll leave to those guys. I know one thing, it certainly helped us a great amount. Okay, I'm going to do the quickest Philadelphia campaign ever, and talk about Valley Forge. But the British, they take Philadelphia after the battles of Brandywine on September 11th. There's the Battle of the Clouds, the Paoli Massacre, some of you may have heard of. You have battles at Germantown in the fall. And we obviously were trying to take the capital back. You have the fall of Fort Mifflin, the fall of Fort Mercer in October and November. But our army's not destroyed. Washington's not going to throw everyone in and basically lose his army. 12,000 men will encamp at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, about 20 miles outside of Philadelphia, build about 2,000 of these little log huts. Some of them, their families actually join them. But they will go through the winter months, through this. Has anyone ever been to Valley Forge or King of Prussia? There's a huge mall at King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. When I went to Valley Forge, to get my family to kind of agree to the historical part of the trip, I had to go to the King of Prussia Mall. Hey, that's not the funniest, but I didn't know the mall had like 600 stores and was the largest mall on the East Coast of the United States. So I was like, what did I get myself into? I thought I was going to look at Valley Forge, So Valley Forge, to me, this is a time of transformation. Thanks to this guy right here, General von Steuben, who's able to come in and he changes everything. Where are you putting the bathrooms? Where are you putting the kitchens? How far apart are the men staying in the cabins? It's not just a military transformation. It's up here. It's a medical transformation. Yes, did we not have enough supplies? Did these guys that were there suffer through with no shoes, no coats? Yes, I'm not saying none of that isn't true, and we're able to persevere, through that. We're close enough to the British that they can't totally ignore us either. But, von Steuben is able to take this ragtag, beat-up army and transform it into a professional fighting force. And his first military job, I'm going to take these 100 guys and train them. Just train these 100. Your job is to turn around and train the other people. And von Steuben's not impressed whatsoever. And I don't think he liked our attitude very much either, because he said, I've trained soldiers in Europe. When I tell you to do something, you do what you're asked to do. When I train Americans, they want to ask me, why are we doing it that way? Couldn't you just do this or that? It's a whole different thing. So von Steuben's not necessarily going for that part, but it works. This is the foundation for victory. We just had the anniversary of the Battle of Monmouth on June 28th, Monmouth Courthouse. The first battle these guys will get into, toe-to-toe, shoulder-to-shoulder with the British, is going to be at Monmouth in June. I guess technically it's considered a draw, but in reality, I think the British realized there's no tricks here. These guys are a real army. And that was way too quick to go through Valley Forge, but we got 10 minutes, and I got to bring you to the Upper Ohio Valley here. We got to talk Fort Henry here for a few minutes. Probably two pictures you have seen many, many times. The Ohio County Public Library has an awful lot of information on basically Fort Henry and the history of why this was here. Built in 1774, not manned all the time, like 24/7 for all that time, but local militia, and basically it's to protect from Native American attacks. And I think that at different times it was a place where the local population, if they weren't sure, were able to come in. So this would be Fort Henry here. This would be the Zane fortified house about 70 yards away. And right there, if you could see, that's Betty Zane's gunpowder exploits. So that's probably more of a 1782, September 1782. But the fort wouldn't have looked much different, I don't think, or the Zane. People were fortifying their houses. The war in the West, the war here in Wheeling, was completely different than what you think about Germantown or Saratoga. This is brutal. This is hit and run. There's almost no discerning between civilian populations and military. So this was actually, terrible. Macaulay Sleep, this actually is something, I think this picture is actually in the Upper Ohio Valley Historical Review too. But let's really quick talk about what happened here. Edward Hand, the regional commander at Fort Pitt, sends word that we're getting rumors that there's going to be attack at Fort Henry or nearby coming up soon. He basically he wants 11 militia units to converge or gather at Fort Henry at Wheeling, for defense. Initially, 350 men. By August, 6 companies actually arrive and stay for August. They're patrolling Wheeling Creek. They're patrolling the Ohio River Valley. They're not seeing anything. They've been here for a month. The local population is supposed to be feeding them, supplying them, taking care of them, and that's no place for 350 people to be. If there's no fighting, I'm going home. That was kind of the mindset of the militia. Not that I don't care, but I'm here because I thought there was an imminent threat. I'm not here just to be stationed here and garrisoned here for the next 6 months. That's not how forts worked, whether it be, Fort Henry, Fort Van Meter, or any of the other forts. Now, a place like Fort Pitt may have had some people there. There's no major threat. By the end of August, the only people that are left at Fort Pitt, at Fort Henry, less than 100. Captain Joseph Ogle's 25-man company that had come from Buffalo Creek, and I think that they had come from near Wellsburg or Follansbee, from the north. Am I saying those correct too? I think that's where I believe Ogle's men had come from. And you have the local militia that lived nearby under Samuel Mason. Guess who else is watching till that 300 plus militiamen leave? The Native Americans. So we're talking Wyandotte, Mingo, Shawnee, Lenape, all of these native groups. They're not going to attack you when you have 350 people there. They're waiting till those people leave. And they did that. So the night before September 1st, there's less than 100 defenders there. A couple guys get up in the morning, leave Fort Henry, and they're going to be attacked and ambushed right outside the fort, barely get back. The call for help now goes out to some of the closer by forts. Because when I looked at this, I was thinking, wait a minute, why wasn't Samuel McCulloch here already? He wasn't one of those the people that had left, so the call for help does go out. The first one, Captain Van Swearingen, he has 14 men from Cross Creek, so about 20 miles to the north. The second to respond is Major Samuel McCulloch, which I don't know if you're aware of this. Samuel McCulloch was also a member of the Virginia legislature also. So he wasn't just an excellent, frontiersman, but he arrives with 40 men from Van Meter's fort near West Liberty. And you have to be careful because I believe there's a Van Meter's fort where McCulloch was, and then there's a Fort Van Meter in Hampshire County about 9 miles south of Romney. So those are two different places. And he obviously, Samuel McCulloch's coming from the one, it's about 10 miles from here, I think, West Liberty, maybe a little bit more. The first group to come in, Van Swearingen's men come in. They have about 40 people. They're not going to be harassed. But here comes McCulloch, and as they're approaching the fort, they are going to be attacked. And McCulloch has about 40 men. I don't think the Native Americans wanted the fort to be built up again to a strong point. McCulloch is like a rear guard himself and gets separated. This is the story you all know. Gets separated from the rest of the men who barely make it into Fort Henry. McCulloch scrambles off on his horse and finds himself completely surrounded by Native Americans on three sides. The other side is Wheeling Hill. And, the only eyewitness is Samuel McCulloch. So that's the account we go by. He's saying it's a 300-foot drop from where he was of a near vertical, embankment. Now, I'm not a professional horse rider and know very little about it, but I looked this up. A horse could jump 1 meter or 4 feet and actually be injured. So I think McCulloch's leap, much different than the picture you see behind me, is probably more like a scramble, run, fall, get up, and the Native Americans don't pursue him. When he gets down and turns around, they're just sort of up there looking to see if this guy's going to make it. They don't fire. The next morning, the Native Americans they weren't in for like a long-term siege. They burn about 25 cabins, loot and burn about 25 cabins, and kill about 300 cattle around Wheeling at that time. And then they leave. Now, why are frontier forts important? Not just for awesome stories like McCulloch's leap, but also, I think, because they're providing something for everyone involved. Civilian and local militia protection, that's going to benefit people when the revolution's over. That everyone will want to move to the west. Native Americans are going to look at basically, since we're talking Young Washington, the Jumonville Glen incident and Fort Necessity of 1754 up until the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794. That's one long 40-year span of fighting. They don't see it as one, the French Indian War is over and now I'm friends. You're trying to take our land in one way or another. These frontier forts are extremely important. Controlling a strategic area, a strategic corridor like the Ohio River. But Fort Stanwix along the Mohawk River would be another example of that too. Fort Pitt, tactical control of an area. And all of these are going to be important even after, 1783, after the Treaty of Paris. So what does it all mean? So in conclusion, guys, let me talk to you this, and then we'll get to questions. I know we're at about an hour, and I thank you for being an outstanding audience. To borrow Sir Winston Churchill's line, this isn't the end. This isn't the beginning of the end, but it's the end of the beginning. So this is, I know I love that one too. This is something where, the Americans had to show that, quit planning your victory parades in London and stuff. We're still in this thing. We could still win it. And actually, they're able to do that. The word is out that the American colonists can win. This isn't a little uprising that you're just going to put down and it's going to be over. The French are now on our side, that when you come see Robert Kelly next week, he's going to give you the lowdown on everything with the French assistance. Some of our leaders have their finest and worst moments. I'm talking Arthur St. Clair. I'm talking Benedict Arnold. I think George Washington doesn't get enough credit for that appeal that I talked about with the Second Battle of Trenton. Those guys had you can imagine, I'm 2 days away from going home. 2 days. $10? That's what you're going to convince? But he doesn't. He doesn't. These are decisive wins. They're critically timed. They are what I call paradigm shifting. They're mind shifting. Psychologically, where are you at? Do you believe that you can win? That's what's happening with 1777. The world needs to see it. Americans need to see it. The French need to see it. I think that we're able to not win the war, but achieve our goal of doing that. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming out tonight. Yes, yeah.
If you have a question or a comment, as usual, just raise your hand. I will come to you with the mic, and you can ask your question or make your comment. Anybody have any questions, comments? Okay.
Also, this information, it's up on the screen. I have some cards up here and some history stickers, because all your history buffs out there, you could take a sticker too. So, yes, sir, thank you.
You was mentioning how von Steuben was able to essentially discipline the army into something that was professional and organized. And you alluded to something that I thought was really interesting, was that he wasn't used to the attitude that the militia and these Americans were giving him, because at this point in time, they're starting to view themselves as, well, American, individualistic, have freedom, that hierarchy at play. But you do see that mentality with the generals and the officers' corps. And you mentioned that earlier too, with Gates and Arnold essentially having a spat because they viewed their honor at play.
Right.
So how did that in particular, these generals and officers constantly fighting over honor and recognition, how did that come into play in terms of, like, how did the likes of, say, Washington or the Congress keep a lid on that and prevent that from boiling over and ruining the war effort?
Great question. And I think it was difficult for Congress. And a couple examples I'll just allude to with this. Arthur St. Clair, Philip Schuyler, I think they take a beating because a lot of the congressional members are from the Northeast in New England. They saw you fight to the death for Fort Ticonderoga. So you are going to be court-martialed and possibly, kicked out, for that. I think that was bad. Benedict Arnold, as far as I know, is the only person that actually defects to the British side because they were not given the credit. And Horatio Gates actually will go to some of his friends in Congress and actually say, wouldn't I be a better commander-in-chief than George Washington? Oh, wait, look at all those battles he lost. Look what I've done. So kind of promoting himself there a little bit. Do we have officers that are kind of acting in that manner? Yes. I don't think that helped the rank and file. But in the research I've done with a lot of militiamen that are coming from, whether it be this part of the country here in Wheeling or where I live, these guys they looked at fighting in the East completely different as what they saw as fighting in places like Fort Henry. They didn't have this disdain or resentment for the British like they did for Native Americans. So I think they view the military totally different. There's like research that I've done, and I could show you this, where I put my book at. When I look at some of the pension records of Westmoreland County Revolutionary War soldiers, they basically, they don't see this as quite the same thing as maybe somebody from Massachusetts or somebody from Philadelphia. They see that fighting is more, kind of like what I just said with Fort Henry. Wait, is there a reason for me to be here? Like, should I be fighting here? If there's not, I'm going home. Because if not, Native Americans are going to attack my homestead. So it's a tough call, though, how all of that works. I think it's very hard to look at soldiers from Wheeling or even from Pittsburgh. Their world is completely different than people. I'm not saying they're not motivated by patriotism at all, but I do think it's some of that. So hopefully I answered that okay.
We have time for one more question. Anybody have a question or a comment for Mike?
I think there's one here.
Okay. I got you. There you go.
Yeah, we were talking so much about Fort Ticonderoga. I was just reading the other day where General Kościuszko, Thaddeus Kościuszko, they had asked him to look at Ticonderoga, and because he was a civil engineer, and give his suggestions and whatever. He had asked Sinclair, he told him he should fortify the hills and the mountains around there, but they said, oh no, the British will never get their cannons and that up there and be able to attack us from there.
I have heard, I agree that probably that if you're going to ask somebody, Kosciuszko would have been the best because he understood how to do that, set up artillery. Yeah. And definitely Arthur St. Clair and Philip Schuyler, probably when they make that decision to not fortify, and I think I'm saying Mount Defiance, I think it's the primary area right above Fort Ticonderoga.
Yeah, that's the area.
That they had somebody that was an artillery strategist and an engineer that's telling you, you know what, you probably should defend that. I don't know why they did.
Yeah.
I heard a funny quote from a British officer about that, because I think that Burgoyne had said to them, hey, can we get up there? Like, can we? And they said, sir, we've got, see goats up there? Where a goat can go, a man can go. And where a man can go, a cannon can go. Yeah. I don't want to be a foot soldier in that army because you know what that means. I'm dragging cannons up that hill. It's going to be me. So, but thank you. That's a great comment. I appreciate that.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Excellent presentation.